Well, okay. If you have a slow impulse and a long impulse, you have a high knee lift. If you have a short and fast impulse, you won't have a high knee lift. The knee rises as the heel drops. So as the heel drops, that's when the knee's going to rise. It doesn't drop very far. It's not going to rise very far. That's as simple as it gets. So most likely, I would gamble and bet that the slow person has higher knee lift than the fast person because they don't have as fast impulse.
That was coach, biomechanist, and inventor Adarian Barr speaking on the relationship between impulse and knee lift in sprinting. You're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by SimpliFaster. SimpliFaster is an online athletic performance technology shop distributing items such as the Freelap timing system, GymAware, K-Box, 1080 Sprint, and the SpeedMat. I've gotten many of these items from SimpliFaster and can confidently say that they make today's best training technology available to everybody. The Freelap timing system has revolutionized both my practices and my athlete assessments, allowing me to look at the 10-meter fly capability of dozens of athletes in a matter of seconds. It is wireless, compact, portable, and incredibly versatile. The K-Box and 1080 Sprint are fantastic tools for any coach looking to build speed, agility, and implement training scenarios that go beyond the traditional weight room. The 1080 Sprint is being used by great coaches training some of the fastest sprinters in the world, and it truly represents high-performance speed training. I can personally attest that SimpliFaster's customer service is second to none. Christopher at SimpliFaster responds quickly to queries, and anyone who makes a purchase from SimpliFaster is in good hands. If you want to acquire some of the best high-tech training equipment available, stop by SimpliFaster.com. That's simply with an I, faster.com. They are the future of coaching technology. Welcome to episode 132 of the Just Fly Performance Podcast. I'm your host, Joel Smith. Thanks for tuning in today, and we have an amazing biomechanical and sport movement episode today with our guest, Adarian Barr. Adarian has been a mentor to me for, I believe, at least the last 2 years now. I need to actually keep track of when I started learning from him. And he has completely revolutionized the way I look at athletic movement. In terms of just when I watch an athlete sprint or jump, there's probably 5, 6, or 7 more things that I pay attention to now that I literally had no clue about before. I think there's so many times where we just are tempted to plaster blanket cues or instructions on athletes without really thinking full circle about the implications. Things such as get your knees up, or even, and I think that's one that a lot of people have kind of dismissed a little bit, the high knee cue. It's on its way out. But even the relationship of impulse or the force traveling through the Achilles, how quickly it processes the force off the ground, and things like even backside mechanics. And you look at like Noah Lyles running 1969, and that guy's got some backside swing behind him. Some things that a lot of people would say, no, don't do that, don't do that. And so, anyways, before I get too carried away with the biomechanics of it all, Adarian Barr is the master at looking at athletes from a holistic perspective, taking every single thing into account, and then finding that linchpin of performance that is going to make the impact on the whole thing. And I think we talked about that a little bit with Justin Moore in terms of Postural Restoration Institute. And if we can find things, if we can coach our way around maybe issues that an athlete has from a inhale, exhale, getting air out of that left side perspective, then that's better than just making it a big deal and just to be like, oh man, you have to get air out of that left side or you're not going to run well. Anyways, good coaching is about finding that one thing that will set a chain of events that makes everything else better. And I don't think anyone else is better at that than Adarian Barr is. And so today on today's episode, it's very detailed. So honestly, if you need to slow down, take some notes, listen to it a couple times, I would definitely recommend that. Ask questions if you have any. Ask Adarian questions. Myself, leave a comment. Leave a comment on this podcast on Just Fly Sports. Because if you listen to it and process what's going on completely, this episode is an absolute game changer. I actually had the good fortune a week before recording to sit down, or actually head to a track with Adarian and spend 2-3 hours with him working on just this impulse, the way my foot and ankle was intercepting and processing the ground and how that was impacting my front side mechanic, how that was impacting my backside mechanic, how it was impacting my acceleration pattern. And as well as just how to like set up and assess an athlete before they even take a step in like a 2-point start, 3-point start,
how to get the feet aligned properly, how to create an arch, and how to go from there. It's amazing stuff because you start to really look at that moment on the ground and how that processing of the foot sets up everything else in the chain. And so it's all related, it's all linked. So again, topics today with Adarian that he's going to dig into for us is he's going to tell us about his history in training the foot. He's going to define impulse, which again could be a little bit of a complex thing depending on how you look at it, but it really is quite simple. He's going to tell us how to assess an athlete's impulse, talk about that in relation to like plyometrics and deceleration training. He's going to talk about fundamental differences in stride length, as you heard in the teaser, and then finally foot steering and how it impacts impulse and direction of force. And I tell you, I've seen a lot of things and I've learned a lot of things from Adarian, but in learning the foot steering, it really changes so much. It's just a little subtlety that has a big, big impact. So I know you guys will love this episode. Dig into it. There's so much gold in here. Also, too, I've been mentioning this a lot, but my book is now on sale, Speed Strength. Adarian had a huge impact in the development of the first chapter, the Sprint Biomechanics chapter. So definitely, if you haven't grabbed a copy, check that out. It's at Just Fly Sports. So I'd appreciate it if you bought it. Anyways, without any more delay, let's get on to this episode 132 on impulse and sprint technique with Coach Adarian Barr.
So how long have you been looking at the foot specifically? Like, when in your coaching career did you kind of decide, hey, like, because I think that a lot of people who've been in this game long enough will eventually be like, oh yeah, I need to start looking at that more, right? I mean, just ultimately it makes sense. We start figuring that out.
I mean, I've been looking at feet, man, for over 10 years now. You know, I've been modifying shoes and all that kind of stuff for like over 10 years now. And like I said, you go at what you have as far as what's available, and then you have this knowledge, and you're trying to, you know, rectify the two to work out and everything. I mean, I first started cutting shoes because I was on the same boat as everybody else. I wanted more flexibility. I didn't really get the arch. I'm looking at toes and I'm flexing stuff and all that kind of stuff. And I'm trying to get, I didn't really get it because I was going with what current knowledge was about shoes and everything. But early in those days too, I was already cutting out the same shape and stuff of the insole. I already had that kind of design. I just thought it was more like everybody else, that pressure was the issue. So I was trying to relieve pressure because that's what I knew. That's what they said. And then I started studying horseshoes. And like 6 years ago, I started studying horseshoes, and I talked to a friend of mine, and I said, I would like to make a horseshoe for people. And that started the whole, because they make horseshoes for different, you can make a horseshoe to have a horse do this, to have a horse do this, to change a stride. So they can make a horseshoe to affect the horse's stride and gallop and everything else. And so I said, and the horseshoe is around a certain area, it's only on this certain area. And I was like, holy, and that was my whole thought process, a few years ago. It was like, I wanted to make a horseshoe for everybody else.
Yeah. Isn't it amazing how other fields have this stuff down? Like even the people who are making the robots. I saw a little clip from that track football consortium that Chris Corfus was talking about. It was the MIT people writing about basically running mechanics. I was like, these guys got it down. And these other industries. Yeah.
Well, even maybe 15 years ago, I was talking to this one guy. He had a patent on a foot. He was making an artificial foot. He had a patent on it, and we were talking because it was a certain part of the foot that would keep breaking. And I forgot what he called it. And we were, he was in Colorado at the time. He was getting a grant for it, and this was like 15 years ago that I'm talking to this guy, and he had a patent already, but he couldn't fix this one thing. He couldn't fix it. And he was talking to me, I'm talking to him, I'm thinking maybe it's this, but we can go back 15 years when I was already talking to other people that were in this, and they were trying to figure this stuff out. So it's been a process and everything, but like I said, it's one of those things where you just, the knowledge is there. It's just a matter of merging it with everything and getting rid of stuff that shouldn't be there, and everything. Because even, 7 years ago, I was making insoles out of wires because I understood it. Like I said, I was trying to make a horseshoe. So 7 years ago, I was putting wires in shoes and they were working, except the wire keep breaking. The wire would break and it would poke somebody, so I couldn't keep doing that. But like I had this one athlete, he had a wart on his foot. It was during track season, during the end of the season and stuff. And so I made him insole with a wire to keep the pressure off the wart. He ended up making it 1 meter away from state. And people go, the wire don't bother you. No, it doesn't. If you put it right, it doesn't. Just like the horseshoe. If you put the horseshoe on right, it doesn't bother the horse. Put it on wrong, oh, we got some problems.
Yeah. It is amazing too, like you were saying with the wart, like it just largely intention to cushion around the wart, but then it's like, oh, I'm really fast too. And I'm sure you were doing things along like with the horseshoe design, and I just think that it's an area too, like it's a subtle region, right? Like the foot, because it's not just max force and max effort. Right. You have to. It's an art form. You've done this for 10 years. You got your 10,000 hours, man. I got like 10 hours. I got 10 hours. You got that. I'm just learning. So, well, hey, today's show. No,
it's but think about it too. Is like I said when I was on Instagram, I was talking about class 2 lever. And once that really nailed home, it was like, okay, voila. It was once that nailed home about the class 2 levers and stuff. And like I said, I've been into levers for a while because I always. The springboard. I always, like I said, I looked at divers, and I'm thinking, like, how do they do this? They don't crack their head on the dive board, but they're actually using, what are they doing? They stand on the ball of the foot, they bend the heel, they pop up, and they're gone. We in our business, we actually would try and jump off the toes, and they would crack their head. If they tried to jump off the toes, they would crack their head because they wouldn't go anyplace.
Yeah, I've seen you post about the class 2 lever. So how does the class 2 lever of the foot and the ankle, and you're talking about the diver a little bit, but how does that differ from what other people might say in terms of what the foot is and how it works?
Well, most people would agree that the foot is a class 2 lever. You have to. There's no way to disagree about this. It's a class 2 lever. But like anything else, where the mistake is made at is if you have a wheelbarrow, you had to load the wheelbarrow. See, that's the whole thing. You have to load the wheelbarrow. If a wheelbarrow is empty, it's easy to pick up. There's no effort needed to pick it up. So if you want to put some effort in picking it up, you have to load the thing first. So same thing with the foot as a class 2 lever. You have to load it first. We're just used to picking it up with no load on it. But you have to load it first to get effort out of it. So that becomes a thing of why the shin angles becomes important, because the shin angle actually ends up loading the thing, so you get some effort from the heel raising up.
Gotcha. And hey, that leads in really well too to kind of the first official question. And this is what we were talking about, for 2-3 hours yesterday, just having fun at the track. But impulse and running and jumping. So, what would you define? What's like a definition of the impulse for an athlete that projects them along in regards to the foot?
It's just like the wave. It's like a wave. It's just the energy transfer. So. It's just at the impulse is that energy being transferred back to the body. Like I always ask, when people talk about push, and if you push harder, my question always been is, when does the ground push you back?
So I think it's really, I think it's really cool how, like, the idea of when is the ground pushing you back, because and I know something that you always talk about that I've taken on in the way I look at things now is timing. And I think we just often think about max force, just period. But we don't think about at what point does the ground give back. I've always felt like impulse too. Could you also liken it to the Achilles unloading? I guess the Achilles just has to unload when the ground pushes us back. Maybe I'm getting a little confused, but how does this fit in with the Achilles unloading its energy?
Well, two things. You got to remember that part of that, the Achilles is a setup. It's because you have the heel that's attached to the Achilles, and the heel is also attached to the front part of the foot. So you have this other spot in between. So now all of a sudden you have it when the shin is loading or pushing the heel down. When we talk about the negative heel movement, at that point in time, the Achilles is being stretched with the shin movement. And so now as it's being stretched, the heel is going negative, and then pow, everything just pops and releases. And that I showed you videos of that before, where we see the Achilles get really thin, and then all of a sudden the foot moves, But that's the whole thing. The shin angle change and the negative movement of the heel is when the Achilles is being stretched at that point in time. So like I said, when you see the heel come back up, everything's done.
Yeah, and that was one of the biggest revelations for me. Is it's almost like building the stride, sprinting, accelerating, or even like jumping, cutting, whatever your sport is, not even just track, but anything. Like, it all revolves around the timing of that when the ground pushes back and your Achilles unloads.
Yep.
And to me, I was just like, man, what a game changer. And even, yeah, I think it was what, like 6 months ago, 8 months ago, you're posting about the watching people come out of the blocks from the back, or even just any
Right.
movement where they don't have like high socks on, and you see that Achilles thin out as it unloads, which I was like, that was a mind trip for me, because I was taking a rubber band after that. I was like, wait, when this gets shorter, it gets fatter. I don't understand why the Achilles is the opposite. Like, I spent like a whole day thinking about that, and it just confused the
Yeah,
shit out of
yeah.
me.
Well, I mean, that's one of the things. Like I said, all this stuff is in front of us. It's just a matter of how we interpret it and what we see, and so, and like I said, I spend a lot of time. Like I said, I got the hours in that I watched movement so much that I can see details now that I may not have seen if I hadn't studied movement so much. And I think that's what we lose is the details. Nobody will catch the details of watching that Achilles thin out and then watch it go boom. Because most people would think what? In this business, most people, oh, you're about to tear your Achilles. That's what they would think. Oh, your Achilles, you're about to tear your Achilles, just like inside edge. Oh, you're going to blow your knee out. So people equate movement to injuries. And so they stop at that point. At that point in time, they just stop thinking about it and they avoid it because they see injury coming.
Yeah, it's once you have those ideas and it's just new things to look at. It's just been such a game changer for me as I've worked with you. It's just looking at a joint and thinking, oh yeah, now here's something I can watch with this joint, and now here's something because before I would have had no clue, with the whole impulse thing. I always knew that Achilles loaded and unloaded, but to look at it and link it to the timing, I that was totally new to me and has really changed a lot. And
Yeah.
so one thing too, I was going to ask you, so what do you look for in terms of an athlete's impulse? Like how big it is or little it is? How does the magnitude of the impulse play into their movement, and then what you're going to be coaching them with?
Well, two things. The least amount of movement and the fastest movement is the best. The least amount of movement, fast movement is the best. And so and the reason that is an important statement so people don't start trying to get more. Everybody wants to get more. Let me see I can push this thing 10 inches and pop it back. No, if you can move it a quarter inch fast, you can get a whole lot out of it. It doesn't. That thing it's so powerful in a sense, but at the same time, you have to be so fast. If it's only gonna move a quarter inch and move fast, you better be fast because it's traveling fast through you. Now you gotta get the other foot down, and then what do we try to do? Once again, we try to get a bigger step. Well, no, you can't get a bigger step because it's not gonna throw you that far. And at the same time, to me, the reason I look at that because that represents the max speed that you're traveling. When that thing releases, that's your max speed. So if I'm trying to run, I want to catch myself at this max speed, not 2 seconds later as I'm slowing down, and then I have to really try and push harder to try and get going again. So for me, it's always the travel distance and the speed that it travels that distance at. The shorter the distance, the faster travel, the better.
You're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast, brought to you by SimpliFaster. Yeah, I think we see that a lot, like people who are accelerating. And I was talking about this a little bit on the Q&A podcast I did a little while ago. Is like we are in the industry where it's just like more. Like if little is good, a lot is better. Or even like a sled, right? You showed me this. It was like people doing sled marches, which common exercise. I think
Right.
it's perfectly fine drill, but people do it and the ankles are just getting destroyed every step. Like they're going to huge dorsiflexion. They're taking all the slack out, and their legs are just overpowering the Achilles. And so it's like, how is the ground even going to push you back in that scenario?
Right. Well, and that's what we talk about too. Is we can, like I said, it's not very strong to begin with, so we can easily overpower it. It doesn't take much to overpower it, or I say to kill it. If you kill it, you got problems. And that's why even like sometimes when you see people jump off a box, and they jump off a box and they want to stick the landing. No, don't stick the landing because you're working against that whole impulse. It's gonna and it's funny once again. They talk about opposite and equal. I hit the ground, I'm gonna bounce off the ground, but then we stick the landing. No, don't stick the landing. Let it bounce you again. Let the impulse bounce you again. And basically, you should take kind of like away once again. You should take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 bounces until it's gone. But you shouldn't jump off of something and kill it because then you're learning something that you're going to have to unlearn if you really want to run fast, jump high, and throw far.
Yeah, that's something that I think is a little bit of a trip because I've always felt like doing some of the, where you just do the altitude drop and you absorb it in like maybe the base phase of a plyometric program. But you get, I mean, I forget what study it was, but it was like basically you do that stuff too much where you don't rebound and you start to like segment out your jump. I forget what study it is. It's killing me that I don't remember it, but I think they were talking about it even when I was in graduate school 15 years ago where like the plyometrics group, the group that just did landings, like it's almost like their jump happened in two parts, and so it screwed up the impulse.
And that's what we was talking about too with the whole sprint start thing and lifting weights and stuff like that. When we was talking about how if all you do is extend, then when it's time to run or jump, you don't get the fold up portion. And the fold up portion is really critical also. So all of a sudden I'm coming out of blocks, and that's what we was talking about yesterday when we was doing the jumps. What do they call those jumps?
Oh, it was just tuck jumps.
Tuck jumps. Okay, yeah, we was talking about the tuck jumps, and if you tuck jump, your calf and your heels will automatically come up. If you release the energy, it will come up. Why? Because you got to remember that the knee is going down and the heel's going backwards. So when it releases, guess what? The heel has to keep coming up. But what do? We extend, we don't let the energy release, and so we start having problems. So that becomes a thing too. And we see it with weightlifting where people want to extend and they kill the impulse again. The really good ones, they drop so fast. As soon as the impulse happens, they drop and they're underneath the weight. But once again, we have to talk about two different things. My issue is always about being fast. It's always about being fast. And so you can have two guys lift heavy weights. One can do it fast and one can muscle it. I'm going with the fast guy because the faster I go, the more actually I'm going to lift. I can only muscle so much, but I can get really fast and keep going up there.
Yeah, I know. The impulse, even outside of plyometrics, or doing depth jumps and not just trapping the force continually. And I mean, I think
that's a good term right there. Yeah, trapping the force.
I consider a drop like you're trapping it. And now, like, I do get like the idea of if I'm going to have an athlete do a depth jump, like eventually, I want to be able to land it and check everything, first, but I don't want that to be the paradigm. Like deceleration isn't like the focus. We're not training deceleration today. Like, I think that's too, like you see people doing the deceleration train, like, oh yeah, we're going to drop off this box and land on one leg. But then it's always like, they're just stuck in supination. Like they land and they're just like plowing into the outside edge of their foot, and I'm like, how are you going to redirect this? Like this is why that study was like that, where the jump becomes two parts or whatever you do, the sport cut, whatever, because you're not training yourself to redirect. And you probably were doing just fine in your sport. Like, why do you have to train to do this? And who's to say what is a good like what's the bar for a good deceleration, right? Like, because it doesn't happen that often.
Well, that's why you always hear me say deceleration is already built into the movement. If I jumped off a building that was 15 feet high, deceleration is built into it. I don't have to practice it. It's going to work pretty well. And my body understands the difference between jumping off something 15 feet high and jumping off a foot high. It knows it very well. It's going to handle both of those. I don't have to practice the one at 15 feet. I don't have to practice the one at 1 foot. Just jump. It's going to work out, And so that's the whole thing is if you train deceleration, at that point in time, you're training to kill impulse. You're training to kill it.
It's the impulse is it really, the more I look at it, just the impulse is just everything. And so we talked a little bit about what is the impulse, looking at in terms of how big an athlete's impulse is and how fast it's coming. So you've talked about this a little bit, like an athlete who let's say they're set up in just like a 2-point position and they're gonna take off, and we're looking at their back foot and how much. So an athlete whose back foot or like bent very little, or that back heel, it's off the ground and ready to go, and the back heel comes down towards the ground. What's the difference between an athlete whose heel only comes down maybe like a couple centimeters and explodes back versus an athlete whose heel comes down like, I don't know, like 5 or 6 or 7 centimeters and then comes back? What's some fundamental differences in looking at the athlete who depresses a lot to get going and the athlete who depresses very little?
Pivot point. So an athlete that may depress a lot is going to be more on their toes than actually that pivot point has moved to their toes in a sense, versus the pivot point should be the ball of the foot. So an athlete that's on the ball of the foot will have less negative heel movement than an athlete that's on the toes. That's going to be the biggest difference right there. The other part too is when we talk about the change in shin angles. So and that's why we talk about being tight, all this stuff about being loose. So if I'm tight, then things are going to transfer much faster. And which is a funny thing is that word take up slack. We want to take up slack, then we do all this stretching. We increase the range of all these joints, then we say, I want to take up slack. Well, stop all this other stuff, and the slack is so these movements allow us to take up slack. But now we're dealing with two things. So let's say your heel does hit the ground. That's no big deal. Let's say your heel does hit the ground. So at this point in time, and what we talked about yesterday with the foot steering, and I know we weren't going to talk about foot steering, we were talking about impulse, but foot steering is part of impulse. At that point in time, you have to steer your foot left or right to continue taking up slack. So it becomes another thing again. But the biggest thing is that if the foot travels, the more the heel travels in a negative fashion or down towards the ground, the longer it's going to take for that to be returned to you. And it's going to be one of those things where when it returns, you have to make sure that the other swing leg or whatever you're doing matches that speed. So if you have this long travel, then the other leg has to have a long, slow travel too, so they match up. If you have a fast travel, the other leg can have a fast travel so everything matches up. Or if we're talking about throwing something, say you're throwing the javelin. Man, when the impulse happened, that's when you talk about having a fast arm. When that impulse happened, the arm better be gone. But in javelin, we see a lot of times too, what happens? We see the heel starts to travel back up, and then we see the knee break, and then we see they're too slow because their impulse already happened, and they're so far behind it. Now they're going to muscle with the arm, and they wonder why the elbow hurts. The impulse happened already.
Yeah. So, I mean, that makes so much sense. And in the sense of the different types of athletes, like you think about an athlete who's like a little bit more loose jointed, like a rotational, like a throw, like maybe a baseball pitcher or javelin thrower, someone who really wraps it. Right. And the timing fits with that. You go through the long pull because you had that longer impulse. And I know what you were talking about, and maybe this is what people listening could really like dial in and wrap and kind of put all this on or project this on, as you were saying that if you had looser joints, you would do better if I was doing a 2-point start or a block start with my feet wider apart, because like you said, like that I have a longer impulse in my foot, and so I have to give myself a spacing like that, long front to back spacing, so that the leg has time to swing through as my impulse is going. Whereas maybe like the Ben Johnson, like feet like right next in the pedals, where he doesn't depress. Yeah, he doesn't depress much. His impulse happens so fast. If his feet were stretched out long front to back, he wouldn't know what to do with it. It would be weird to even think about that or see it, right?
Exactly. And so that's why when people get caught up in block start on this 120, whatever, or this exact thing, your block start setting should be based on the speed and depth of your impulse. That's all it is. And that's why we had the assessments. If you do the assessments, this information you already have, and people are thinking like, what do you mean I got an assessment? You're going to have to explain that to people too, right?
Yeah, well, maybe we should go through that. If you're going to talk about it, like maybe just a quick version too of how you would assess that would just, like if someone had their shoes off and they're doing a 2-point start, and like what's the nutshell version of what you're looking at there?
Well, nutshell version I'm looking at is they squat down and the knees start to, or the ankle, dorsiflex of the ankle, whatever you want to call it, shin angle starts to change. I'm looking for the depth that it changes, and the heels stay on the ground. Once the heel starts to come off the ground, it's over. So once again, when they squat down, the shin angle is going to start to change, and how far does it go before the heels start to come off the ground? That's going to be your block setting. We're going to set it up just that simple. And what happens at that point in time, though, is that people never force that issue. People, you know what I'm saying? People never, how far can I really press my knees forward? How far can I really before the heels start to come off the ground? So once you get there, that becomes the first assessment, is just assess your shin angle, depth of shin angle.
Yeah, and just from like a really polarized black and white too, like just to be the simplest possible, I guess, if I was to reduce this as I always hate to polarize things, right? But like someone who could get really far down in that squat, like a ton of forward knee travel, kind of longer, looser Achilles,
Right.
they would be a wider block spacing, and then their knees would be farther down because their knees can like to kind of get that Achilles closer to loaded before
Right.
they explode. That would be a
Right.
good way of putting it.
Right, exactly. Somebody, and so this is where like I said, this becomes a funny thing. If you don't squat very much, what do they try to get you to do? Squat more. But now, see, that's always this more thing. So yes, if you have somebody with that much travel, yeah, further apart. Somebody with not a very much depth to their squat, stick them close together.
Yeah, like someone who's just like tight and loaded and has a hard time squatting down all the way. And even though, me as a strength coach, I'm like, squat down all the way, damn it, like get your knees forward. But they're loaded. They're and that's where we think too about like the repercussions of all this stuff. I mean, because even me, like I'm definitely not the same athlete I was 15 years ago in the sense like I'm a much better deep squatter now. And, in some levels that's helped me a lot, with some general strength in some key areas. But what I think I just forget is how that's changed my Achilles and my impulse over the years.
Right. Well, it becomes the thing that with the assessment. And so, and we'll mention real quick. So the 4 things to the assessment is we want to see which way the feet steer. We want to see the depth of the shin angle change. We want to see the knees track, and we want to see your impulse level. So with those 4 things, we can determine how to set you up for almost any sport, because we already know if say on an impulse, it doesn't travel very much, but it's slow. That means you have very little impulse to start with. So you can have some very choppy strides in a sense, for somebody with not much travel, but it goes fast, they can open up on somebody, So you're looking at these different things, but you get some specific answers to an athlete and how to train an athlete just based on those 4 assessments and everything. But yeah, you're right. If they could squat down and touch their knees to their toes, they need to have a wide stance. If they squat down and the shin moves 2 inches, they're gonna have a very short stance.
I got you, because they're already loaded. Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, it is just so crazy that these absolutes exist. Like, I mean, and yeah, if you have a bunch of kids at track practice that like, don't know anything, about blocks, yeah, maybe you could start with the 2 foot and 3 foot if you don't have, and then we'll work from there a little bit. But like, just to hammer that angle, like, especially with everything I've learned from you, now what we've talked about in the podcast, like some people might get there and they're going to be, get their doors blown off. Like a few hundreds are going to go by before they can even get to the point where their impulse could start, and other people will be gone already. It's impulse management, really. It's a skill of impulse management. That's what sport is. It's a sequence of events too. It's not just one thing. It's not just here's a binary single thing that's going to happen. It's like, okay, shin angle changed. Now, now this is going to happen, and then down the. It's really complex. It's not that simple.
And so, if you don't practice that, and for these guys at the elite level, they have a lot of this ability already. But if we don't have it, we can practice it and pick up on it.
Yeah.
So you can teach a receiver that skill now. They say, hey man, look it. All they're gonna do is set this shin angle, jam this back, and you off the line before you even know it.
Oh yeah, no, that's something that you could set up in a training, just a 2 steps training sequence. You could make it happen, and it's just it's again, I think we tend to just maybe not look at things that way. But once you see it, you can't watch an athlete train and not think about it, and I think that's really powerful. I was going to ask you too, and maybe this is just like another really simple thing, like beyond acceleration, because everyone knows upright running and what upright running looks like, and so. Yeah, I'll let you close that first. There you go.
They don't know how to be quiet.
Yeah. At least my kids quieted down. So everyone knows upright running, what upright running looks like, and I think this is just something that's so cool, because I think that, upright running is just, it's simple in the sense of, it's really complex, but like I mean, compared to like a football skill player taking off and making moves, it's not that complex, you know.
No.
It's easy to understand, wrap your head around. But like, so how does a stride like I'm up and running, whether I'm running a mile or whether I'm running, you know, the 100-meter dash, regardless, how does my impulse impact things like how high is my knee going to lift, or the timing of the cycle?
Well, okay. If you have a slow impulse and a long impulse, you have a high knee lift. If you have a short and fast impulse, you won't have a high knee lift. The knee rises as the heel drops. So as the heel drops, that's when the knee's going to rise. It doesn't drop very far. It's not going to rise very far. That's as simple as it gets. So most likely, I would gamble and bet that the slow person has higher knee lift than the fast person because they don't have as fast impulse.
You're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast, brought to you by SimpliFaster. Yeah, that's crazy, man. Because I mean, the video that a lot of people who are into track or even just running have seen it so many times. With the one, it's like Bolt's running slow motion, Christophe Lemaitre's there next to him. There's some like short guy on the end who's going pretty fast right off the bat, but then he gets overtaken.
Right.
And I think the Bolt and Lemaitre are a good example of the quick, or what would you say, like the quicker impulse being Bolt and the slightly longer impulse with Lemaitre, because he really like rides over that leg for a long time and he gets this tremendous knee lift.
Right. I would say two things. One is that you see the difference in two fast athletes, you know. The other thing too is you see better management of an impulse. So Lemaitre could get faster if his impulse was managed better.
So basically, because you know his foot ends up behind him a long time to apply that impulse, how would he manage it? Is it through twisting of the foot that he's going to manage that a little bit better?
Man, I wish I had a video to pull up right now. But you notice one thing, the whole thing about it is this here. When we talked about high point, low point with the heel traveling up and back down to the ground, the foot.
Sure.
The heel has the same thing. The heel has a high point, low point, you know. Your foot is the ground, the heel's going to drop, low point, come back to the high point. No big deal. So what you see with Lemaitre versus Bolt is this here. Bolt foot leaves the ground, it immediately goes to a high point. It immediately comes back to a low point. Lemaitre foot flips up to a high point, then it slides forward because he's sliding forward. So his impulse, so in a sense, he's so far of his impulse that he's waiting now for his impulse to happen. And then when the impulse happens, the foot kicks around and then he gets, you know, but so if they would manage his impulse better, take that slide out, he would get his feet around much faster without compromising his stride length.
Gotcha. So basically, like, maybe you could say this too as one of the negative implications of just telling someone to get their knees up is they're going to delay their impulse to make that happen. Like,
right.
If my coach says, get your knees up and run, or even when you do like just A runs, right? Or like
right.
you have to change the way the impulse happens through the foot and off the ground to let that knee get up there. And then
right.
It probably isn't your natural impulse and you don't run as fast.
Right. Also, too, I can show you video of people doing 3 or 4 impulses because it's, you know, they do one, they do another one, they do another one, they do another one. Then by that time, you don't have much left.
Yeah.
But you can see that happening too. But the other thing is that, yeah, it's if you lift your knee, it's going to take away from the impulse, you know? So, and then we talk about the whole backside thing where people want to get rid of backside. You don't want to get rid of backside because it's tied to the impulse. You know, it's another thing. It's not that it's excessive or anything like that, but it's waiting on the impulse. And when the impulse happens, that foot will get whipped around just as easy.
Gotcha. So that's interesting that you were mentioning that because I mean, that's always something that I just heard was like, you know, watch the backside, be frontside dominant, don't be. I mean, and there's also like, don't be a butt kicker. Like, I mean, I think there is a difference between good backside and bad backside mechanics, right? I mean, there's certainly people who do it poorly.
Well, yeah, like anything else, you know, it's, you know, what we talked about is who's flexing the knee. Is the hamstring flexing the knee or is the calf flexing the knee? Makes a big difference, you know? So, yeah, and that's why a lot of times, too, where I tell people, just because you see 2 people doing the same thing, don't mean they're doing it the same way.
Yeah.
You know? So yeah, there are some ways and that's what's, if you're talking about traditional push the ground person, then yeah, they probably do want to get rid of backside. Because they just trying. But if we're talking about an impulse person, you don't want to get rid of the backside. You want to understand how to manage that and time it to the impulse. So the foot's at a high point at the right time, and then the impulse happens and kicks the foot down to the ground, which creates the next impulse. I don't have to push the ground because I got this foot traveling down to the ground super fast, and now that's my next impulse.
Yeah, everything just has this harmonious balance to it, right? Like even you were saying, like even when you try to punch the ground, like if you're trying to be front side in acceleration, you're punching down into the ground, which I know is very common. And, like at least it gets people thinking about the impact they're creating, the way that
Right.
they're, because we want the shins to hit the ground when we're accelerating at that angle, not
Right.
just falling out in front of us, which I tend to do a lot. And that's good. But from an impact perspective, if you're punching the ground, you're almost creating more of an impact than you could potentially handle with the timing of things.
Exactly. Because once again, when is that coming back to you? So if you punch the ground, it's coming back so fast, the impulse coming back so fast, you're not ready for the next step.
Yeah, because you're really magnifying it.
Go ahead.
Yeah, you're really like magnifying. It's almost like you're making it more plyometric in nature, but it's like fitting it around the. Because I guess you just think about like an animal in the wild, or like a cheetah isn't thinking about punching the ground. It's a different being, than we are.
Right. But they understand impulse, because you watch them when they stretch out to the impulse. They stretch out to the impulse. They just don't really nearly. You can see them gather, impulse, stretch out. Gather, impulse, stretch out. So you can see the harmonious flow still.
So yeah, something actually I was thinking about today as I was going out doing my workout. So you got all this impulse stuff in my head now, and the way I see this too is I think to do this adequate justice in just a podcast over the air, you listen in the car. It's hard to wrap your head completely around a lot of the things. But one of the things I think that I was able to, and I always have to start with something really simple, just 1 degree straight front to back, and I got that, and let me figure this out. So one of the things that I've done in the past that I've noticed has always given me tremendous results, athletic results, is what I call mini bounding, which is like basically where I'm bounding and I'm trying to, and then this, and more like recently, like especially it's in my 30s, like because I've lifted a lot. I've gotten my squat better in a way that my Achilles were a little bit looser, and I've probably lengthened my impulse out a little bit. And I've always liked mini bounding, where basically you just try to strike the ground quickly. I mean, really, it is almost not entirely punching the ground, but basically you're just trying to minimize the contact time a little bit in favor of a longer bound, like where you're going for max distance. And I've liked pairing that with Olympic lifts and stuff like that. And maybe that helps the cleans get a faster impulse in the cleans or something like that. And vice versa. But I was just doing that a little bit today, like doing this really quick contact time bounds, and then contrasting that to like letting the bound out, like then going for max distance, and a little bit like what you're saying, like doing in and out sprints where it's not like 30-meter segments, but like 5-meter segments where it's like short, fast, and you feeling that. So, but it's just crazy feeling how the impulse changes and where it is when you're doing like 5 to 10 yards of bound as fast as you can with contact times, and then bound as far as you can, and you can just feel it's like your body truly weighed and pushed versus a quick strike. And that was actually something I was going to ask too, is changing the impulse. So like, I know for me, I mean, I feel like I would love to get my impulse quicker. Like, I mean, is that something that you're looking at if you're coaching somebody? You're looking at how big their impulse is. Obviously, on the day, you coach them to what their impulse is, but is there something where you would say, hey, we need to get your impulse a little faster, or longer, or anything like that? Is that in the equation?
Well, no, it's not that. The impulse is going to dictate what you do. So the impulse may get stronger and faster. That means you need to do something different.
Yeah.
And as we talk about this timing and management again. So the impulse is always going to dictate everything else. So we can do drills, yes, to say, okay, we're going to try and increase the speed of the impulse. We're going to increase the depth of the impulse. We can always do that. But as soon as you do that, you have to make the other adjustment.
Yeah. Yeah, that's where it's just like, I mean, like any training program, you did a program, you got faster and, you maybe more powerful in these ways, but then you got to fit it into your technique, and that takes time. Like it takes time to cycle that time.
Yeah, that takes time, to make those adjustments and everything, which is like we said, just like at the track yesterday, my philosophy on block starts is, if you're really doing block starts, you need to do 20, 30, 40 of them in one day, because you work it out step by step by step by step, And so as soon as you make an adjustment on that block start, you got to start all over again with step by step by step by step adjustment. Because like I said, we saw yesterday, okay, you got one good impulse in. Now you got two good impulse in. Now you got three good impulse in. It's step by step by step. And most people come out of blocks, they just react. I just react. No, it takes, if you're really doing block work, it takes a whole lot of starts to figure out that impulse and the timing and manage it right.
Yeah, no, it is really amazing actually how much technique is in a start. And I think I was just reading an article that Mike Boyle put out about their athletes, and like they're going through the strength and resistance training program, and how people's verticals would go up, but the sprint times wouldn't really see that same benefit. And and it's just it's very technical. Like, it's a lot more technical than people would think. Even Jerome Simeon he was strength coach for Kevin Mayer, just broke the world record in the decathlon, was saying like top end speed, a lot of times you're just going to run to what your body has to offer, but acceleration is a little bit more technical. Like, it takes reps.
Yeah, it takes reps and stuff like that. And the other part is just understanding, understanding what makes us fast in the first place. And impulse makes you fast. Impulse makes you throw far. Impulse makes you jump high. So you can take this one concept and apply it across the board versus that one concept of just push harder. Whole different, and the reason that, because we can see the impulse, we can see it. We can see with our very own eyes about the depth of it, the speed of it. This is when this is happening. So once you start to see it, we can manage it. A lot of this other stuff we can't see, so we can't manage it. We try to, but we really can't. So now, taking the same context, when somebody says, "Hey, lift your knee higher," okay, make your impulse slower. See, that's the response now. Okay, make your impulse slower, your knee will go higher. Kind of simple. Before, lift your knee higher. Well, how much higher? How much longer? When do I stop it? You got questions that you can't answer. This way, okay, if you want to take it higher, you want to go higher, make that impulse slower, make it slower, it'll get high.
Yeah, I mean, I go back to the bounding too, because the bounding is such an easy way of looking at it. When I'm just trying to be really quick off the ground and be really fast with my impulse, which from a training perspective, I am usually trying to get a faster impulse, because I think as soon as I get loose through I just fall apart as an athlete.
Yeah, no.
It's so bad.
Yeah, I mean, that becomes a thing is just, I mean, same thing. And what's funny for me, as when my impulse gets faster, guess what? My stride has to be faster. So I just think, and it's kind of a feeding itself type thing, which we don't normally think about. We normally think about, I'm going to open my stride up to go faster. We're here with impulse. Actually, if it comes faster, your stride, you got to put your feet down sooner. So your strides may actually get smaller in a sense, but you actually can go faster because you're catching yourself at peak speed more times than not.
Yeah, I was going to say, with the knees up, like when I do the bounding and just try to be fast, my knee doesn't go as high. My knee goes really high when I do those long bounds, that I'm just trying to go as far as I can, where, more like triple jump or whatever. Like, then it'll go, but I'm probably not covering the ground, as fast, and it wouldn't fit as much into like a sprinting or other things I'm trying to do. And it was just interesting to think about, like you said that. And yeah, then the direction where the impulse is, or how long it takes to apply the impulse, completely changes. Right.
And then, like I said, some things we didn't get into, was like, how does the steering of the foot affects the impulse, and how does impulse blow out a knee? Impulse can blow out a knee and that's what we're talking about. Why would you blow your knee out? Because the impulse is coming back through and your foot's going in the wrong direction. So the knee's going to take all that now. That's not a good thing anymore. So yeah, and so it's funny things we try to correct. Like, for instance, we see a lot of elite sprinters do run with their feet turned out, and we want to turn them back in. No, leave them turned out. Just understand how you're going to help steer them to get the most out of their impulse.
Yeah, that's something that I think a lot of people are talking about too, with like obviously Christian Coleman. Oh, that guy's got his feet turned out. What's wrong with, what? He should just turn them in straight and he'll be so much faster. Like, I'm sure that's the thing running through a lot of people's heads. So with the feet turned out, so you get someone who's a little bit, foot turned out like that. How is the foot steering itself as they're up and running?
Well, at that time, like we said, with foot steering, you have the arch of the foot, you have the toes, you have the heel. So the arch connects to both ends together. So technically, I'm a car guy, and I grew up on cars. Talking about alignment. So technically, you're talking about 4-wheel steering at the time. You're talking about this 4-wheel steering thing. So the steering has to be congruent. So if the foot is turned out, that means the heel must also turn out. That means both must go in the same direction. If the foot is inward, that means the heel must come inward. If the foot's straight, the heel can go back. That means everybody's on the same page at that time. And so what tends to happen is that, why is that important? Because their impulse is coming not from the heel dropping down, but from the heel twisting. That it's gonna twist down and snap back around, and they're gone again. So it's just a faster way for these guys to move. Somebody else may say, hey, let's straighten these guys out. All of a sudden, you take this guy that's used to this short impulse and straighten his foot out. Now his impulse just got a little bit longer.
Yeah, an easy way of thinking of that, is the foot turns out, the heel has to go with it. The rear foot and the heel, the calcaneus, goes with it. If it's in, the rear foot has to go with it. But and you had turned me on to that too, with people who are really good out of the blocks. You're watching them from the back, and it's like they'll step, and that twisting manifests itself as soon as they toe off. That toe is coming back towards the midline, almost towards the other foot. And you see that in those good accelerators, but the people who aren't quite as good, aka me, I don't get any of that. And I never really thought about that till you talked about the rear foot and the twisting and how that's lining up. And then anything you load is going to unload, and so right. I thought that was really cool.
Right. Well, even when we talked about triple jump yesterday, and how the fact that if the arch is set, how I can twist my foot in the air. And I can twist it in the air, and I can really jam the ground down and jam off the ground based on me moving my foot in the air to set up my impulse on the ground. Because when I triple jump, what am I going to do? I'm going to land with a flat foot. The foot's going to land flat. So at that point in time, all I can do is twist left or right to get my impulse still. Or like saying in long jump, when is casting good? Casting's good in long jump. Because why? Because I want that leg way in front of me when the impulse happens.
Yeah.
And if it's in front of me now, I'm going to travel with it. So versus high jump, I don't want to cast because it's going to be short and punchy. But I'm still trying to time that to my impulse. So the beauty of this is you can take this one concept and you can put it to every event based on how am I going to manage it for this event here.
Yeah, and that's the gold, man. And even what we were talking about with my hurdling, and I was working on that today too. It's like you give me so many things to think about, because usually my legs sweep straight out. That's why I kept wrecking my hamstring doing hurdles in college, right. And my coach wouldn't let me. and of course, sports medicine is like, oh, what's your quad to hamstring ratio? And it ended up being pretty darn good. And they were really surprised. It's like, oh, why but no one taught me how to hurdle. And even then, what people would just have me do is line me up against the hurdle, have me tuck my heel real tight, and then snap my leg out. But you're saying is I'm just early on my impulse, and so it's gonna that's impacting the way that I'm just swinging my leg straight out to get me over versus having the impulse a little bit later. Right.
And so that's what that's the thing is, when is this impulse going to happen? So when you were hurdling, you had this your impulse happening, your leg's too far in front, so the wave, the energy straightens the leg out. Versus if it happens a little bit later, it's actually going to swing that leg up and over the hurdle. But like I said, and the thing is, you still hurdle. That's always the thing. You still hurdle, but you could have less injuries, better time, and get you a faster time. Just managing the impulse better.
Yeah, it's really and a podcast that'll go out before this one with Dr. Emily Splickle she said something that I really, really liked, and she said it's really you're dancing with the ground. Everything has to be in timing and rhythm and sync, like with even the vibrations of the ground. And
try to stare all day long.
Yeah. And for some reason, I think a lot of people really just try to shy away from that. It's like you're not dancing with the ground if you're punching the ground. I mean, I understand getting people in the right angles and things like that, but to be at the true high performance, the highest high performance, ultimate it's a dance, and everything's in sync with the timing and so. So if I'm trying to kind of summarize what you've been saying is for myself and then the listeners out there in terms of, we're talking about the impulse and the foot and the steering. So a big impulse, so a big long load of the impulse yields a long travel of the swing leg, right? Like,
Right.
and then we also, if we twist to move, so if we're steering, if our toes turn out, then the calcaneus has to go out. If our toes turn in, the calcaneus goes in. And then impulse dictated stride length too. And like the good athletes are still going to figure that dance out. You know, they're gonna, and then we watch them.
Yeah, the good ones. That's why they don't need coaching.
Yeah. And we watch their video, and then we use them to figure out what to do with everybody else, right?
Well, you talk about two things. The really good athletes got it figured out, and the kids have it figured out. In between, we all got it. The rest is in between the good athletes and the children, you know. But even I was thinking about like pole vault, you know, or gymnasts. You know, what do you see those guys do? Really good gymnasts, they have just short, fast strides, but they never miss the beat. They never miss the timing of changing from running to vaulting to whatever they're doing. They never miss it because they're so timed to the impulse, you know. And same thing, a good pole vaulter. That's why, you know, I was thinking the other day, a good pole vaulter shouldn't run with high knees.
Interesting.
Because the impulse is coming so fast. You know what I'm saying? When that pole bends, the impulse, they got to go.
Ah, gotcha. Yeah, adding the pull in, it's going to create almost like a bigger... Well, you got to counter that thing, and if you're too slow, it probably screws up the harmonics of it.
Right. So they really need a fast impulse, or, you know, they need to time their feet because they may not have a fast impulse. So that means they're going to have short, choppy strides also. So work that out, and then boom, everything works for them.
Cool. Well, hey, awesome stuff, Adarian. I mean, every time I chat with you, well, obviously we did all this yesterday in person, so it makes it a little bit, you know, like I tried to be redundant, but it's always good talking, man. And if nothing else, it helped me kind of sort my mind and create kind of this mental notes and checklists of what we went over, and then as well as for everybody at home or in the car listening, just to kind of like, just to have that another tool in your tool belt on what to look for and what to look for first, rather than looking for the outcomes of everything that's built around that impulse. So great stuff today. Thanks for your insight.
All right. Hey, man, thanks for having me. But yeah, as always, man, good times.
All right, thanks for tuning in, everybody. And I hope you enjoyed that one. I hope you're able just to dig in and maybe take some notes. And it's my goal that no matter how the information hits you exactly on what side of, the front side or back side argument you're on, that the episode causes you just to look at things a little bit differently. It gives you that new thing to say, hey, let me check this out when I'm looking at jumping and sprinting and throwing. It makes a big difference. And I'm so grateful that Adarian took the time yet again to share some good information and knowledge with us. So if you enjoyed the show, please leave us a rating or review on iTunes, Stitcher, whatever you're listening to. It would also be awesome if you visit our sponsors, SimpliFaster.com, suppliers of high-end training technology, Freelap, GymAware, K-Box, Muscle Stim, Force Plates. They have an awesome supply and selection of the best technology, and they have a great blog too, and Christopher just does an awesome job over there. So props to them for being a great sponsor for us for so long. We will see you guys next week with French strength coach Jerome Simeon. He is breaking down how he helped Kevin Mayer on his journey to a decathlon world record. Rad episode. This is a 1-2 track and field punch, but again, applicable for any sport, any coach, and we'll see you guys next time.